favorite parts of PopGoes Arcade is the build-up to the battle with dead King Freddy. Unlike the original version of the game, where King Cultivate's castle is filled with random encounters like any other area, here, it's the slow build, where you learn King Freddy's motives, and how exactly he went about killing the forests. If you're like me, what was here was surprisingly captivating. What otherwise is a pretty standard story with an overall lighthearted tone, dips its hands into talk of the paranormal, recontextualizing your journey with a surprisingly sad revelation about the animals you've been fighting. It has a surprising amount of depth that, of course, led me to try and think deeper. Hi, my name's Amber, and what I'm about to go over here encompasses all of PopGoes Arcade, new releases in PopGoes Evergreen's canon, and the old version of the PopGoes canon. This video is meant to be accessible to people who don't know a thing about PopGoes. I'm going to be doing broad refreshers so everyone's on the same page, but this is also a video about comparing a remake to its original. Things are obviously going to be repurposed from the old story and used in the new one, so I implore you to exert caution if you don't want to get spoiled for PopGoes Evergreen's story. Many things I'm going to talk about from the old PopGoes plot are huge reveals, and so it's really important for you not to watch this video if you care about experiencing the story for yourself, unfiltered. That said, let's begin. PopGoes Arcade takes place in an alternate continuity to the main FNaF series. It only takes FNaFs 1, 2, and 3 into account for its plot, and that's something important to note. PopGoes Arcade is itself one game and an expansion for that game, PopGoes The Dead Forest and PopGoes and the Machinist. The actual game we're playing is also a physical game in the PopGoes universe. It's an arcade game you can play inside PopGoes Pizzeria. The plot of both PopGoes The Dead Forest and PopGoes and the Machinist is told in very short bursts, though there is a lot to read into with them. Let me go over the overarching plot for you. The story starts with you learning that something is draining the life of the four forests the game takes place in. The North Forest has already fallen, and for some reason it's locked off. It's our job, as PopGoes, to find the keys in the other forests. So you do just that, but find on your journey other animals start fighting you. The boss of each area is also a character we're familiar with, Chica, Foxy, and Bonnie. You get keys from beating them, and subsequently open up the North Forest. In it, you find dead versions of the enemies you've been fighting up to this point. A castle lies at the end of the forest, but there's someone guarding it, on a bridge. It's Balloon Boy, and once you beat him, he makes all the other animals come back, stronger than they were before. In turn, you go back through each forest, and find that not only are the standard enemies stronger, but Chica, Foxy, and Bonnie are dead counterparts of themselves. You beat them again though, of course, and use more keys you find from them in order to get inside the North Castle. Here we find out that Freddy is the ruler of the four forests the game takes place in, but something has happened to him. In light of his father dying, Freddy encountered some of his dead dad's old work. Talk of life after death, how exactly the paranormal can compel those around it. Here we find that, in discovering this power, King Freddy got inspired to take action. He was the one who had all the death lasers built and corrupted the forests. King Freddy wants all his people to die, because he cares about immortality. See, in his battle he says that ghosts can live forever, but as it says in his findings, there's an integral step to the process of becoming a ghost. It's not as simple as just dying by accident or natural causes. It has to be the direct result of the actions of someone else. If you have the deer fight amongst themselves and kill another deer, the one that dies in the battle gets to be reborn, in the form of a ghost. Something might confuse you about this. PopGoes Arcade depicts ghosts as skeletons. So yes, King Freddy himself is one once you meet him. He has been killed by the actions of someone else, and the same goes for all the dead versions of the enemies you fight in the overworld. King Freddy wants this for PopGoes as well, but this ends up not working. Dead King Freddy doesn't go out just spouting evil laughs and the like though. No, he's a compelling antagonist because he thinks this is actually for your own good. He wants himself and you to live forever. It'd be crazy to pitch the idea of killing everyone diplomatically though, so he forced it on people. So you beat him, and all is well. That is, until you realize you haven't 100% the game. And here we move on to the bonus content for PopGoes The Dead Forest. See, in order to complete the game, you have to go out of your way to find a secret lurking in King Freddy's castle. This lets you do something with this fountain, and it gets you started on a side quest. Cutting ahead a bit, it leads you into a special encounter with a girl named Bonnie. To make a long story short, this girl is the PopGoes continuity's answer to what this character was leading up to in FNaFs 2 and 3. She is PopGoes' answer to that mystery. What most FNaF fans call Shadow Bonnie, in PopGoes we call Black Rabbit. Bonnie herself is a real girl whose spirit is stuck inside the game. She explains this to you as she unwillingly attacks PopGoes, though there's something she talks about that goes under a lot of people's radar. Look at this here. So it appears that the rumors and my research was true. I have died from the actions of another soul. Which means I now exist like this, a flash of who I was. Animated, active, thinking, but not alive. A ghost. This is all starting to sound pretty familiar, isn't it? She died at the hands of somebody else, and was turned into a ghost. This is exactly what King Freddy's father was researching, and was then employed in order for PopGoes Arcade's plot to take place. So ask yourself this, why is this the same? King Freddy is a fictional character within the scope of PopGoes' universe, but Bonnie herself, the girl, isn't. She's a real person, killed by somebody else, but now trapped inside the arcade game as a spirit. I'll say that I don't want you to ask that question from an in-universe perspective, not even from one within the fiction inside a fiction, in PopGoes The Dead Forest. No. I want you to ask yourself that from the perspective of someone assessing PopGoes Arcade as a teaser game made for PopGoes Evergreen. PopGoes Arcade is meant to clue us in on and tease the plot of a game that isn't out yet. And if we look at it from that perspective, the answer to that question actually becomes very clear. So what, pray tell, is that answer? Well, let me wrap things back around to King Freddy. He became a ghost because he wanted to live longer. He saw the act of it as a gift he was giving to people. He also did research on it in order to better attain this goal. Now, I'm not saying that these two characters are connected, but I am suggesting that there's more than meets the eye with King Freddy just as a character. I'm going to tell you now the big secret to PopGoes Arcade. It's the crux this entire video is built on. Everything else I'm going to tell you is going to stem from this one distinction. This one shift in perspective that not only completely explains what PopGoes The Dead Forest talks about spirituality, but also heavily foreshadows PopGoes Evergreen's plot, near in its entirety. You ready? In one clean sentence. King Freddy is a metaphor for the purple guy. Yeah. Now, that might be coming out of left field for you, but I encourage you to hear me out. PopGoes' original continuity had the purple guy's name be Simon. When talking about PopGoes' story, I'm going to call him that, Simon. Simon in the old PopGoes continuity had a unique motivation. He was interested in the idea of extending life for people, not through medicine, but through blood. Simon found through his research that by ingesting the blood of young people, he could prolong the life of older people. This is the reason why he killed kids in the old continuity. Now, I want you to process that information again, but this time apply it to dead King Freddy. He is also killing people because he sees extending life, immortality, as the best way to go about things. Simon also sees it as a for-your-own-good type of thing. We know this because of how Simon was presented to us in one of the old PopGoes games, PopGoes Arcade 2. Well, I never gained pleasure from it. I didn't care. I just needed what only they had. So I took it from them. Do I regret the pain I've caused? Some of it. But you can't say the results don't speak for themselves. Look at me. Do you see what I've turned into? In the end, I was right. This isn't all there is, though. Next I want to talk about presentation. See, it isn't just that their motivations are similar. The two actually serve similar functions in the story as well, within the context of their respective games. What I mean to say is, I think the narrative of FNaFs 1, 2, and 3 is intentionally being paralleled through the events of PopGoes The Dead Forest. Let me put it one way, so you can better understand what I mean. In the beginning, there are animals that want to kill you, and you don't know why. Once you find out why, you also learn that someone in particular is behind it. So, you fight the animals all over again, and this time get more insight on who the person responsible for it is. He's doing all of this in hiding, killing everyone, and trying to cover up his tracks in the process. These animals are angry, restless, killing people, potentially including yourself, because of his actions. It's up to you to put a stop to it. Once you finally reach him though, he's become a monster. It's disturbing. You dreamed of his death being a karmic comeuppance, but it's revealed to have only empowered him, made him stronger. Think about FNaFs 1, 2, and 3 as a singular story. Don't you think it's fair to say that, within the context of those three games, Springtrap is essentially the series' final boss? There are even little details scattered around that back this idea up. Take for instance how the dividing line between the first time you find Freddy's gang and the second time you fight them is blocked by Balloon Boy. It's like they're using him as a stepping stone for the section of the game that represents FNaF 1, transitioning into the section of the game that represents FNaF 2. Some things present in this game I think also only really get a satisfying answer when you look at them from this perspective. Like, there are these graves here in the North Forest. You can only come here after beating Freddy's gang for the first time, and you never even need to come here. Some players probably miss these in their entirety, and while you may have written them off as set dressing, they actually pose really interesting questions when you think about them. I'll read for you what it says when you inspect them. 5 gravestones. They seem to belong to those who fell to whatever is destroying the forests. Who could have put these here? Plenty of animals have died because of King Freddy's actions, but for some reason there's 5 animals who died that are apparently worthy of having physical monuments made out to them. If you're looking for significance to the number 5 in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, you don't have to look long. There are 5 main animatronics after all, 5 dead kids too. This is a reference to the missing children's incident. Within the context of POPGOES The Dead Forest, these just serve to be graves for Freddy, Freddy's gang, and for his father, though the text, "Who could have put these here?" emphasizes them in a way that I think is important, that doesn't also insinuate that the creator of the arcade game somehow knew about the murders. King Freddy is the one who caused the forest to fall. He is the one responsible for these deaths. It's very striking, especially considering Freddy Fazbear is so typically depicted as a jolly character when matched up with his gang. When you beat Dead Foxy though, Foxy says he never wanted to do this. Dead Bonnie too says that he's going to be so mad with us when referring to King Freddy. Freddy Fazbear is a kid's mascot. Why wouldn't he be friends with his gang? This decision I feel like only really makes sense when you look at it from this point of view. Making Freddy such an overpowering antagonist is unprecedented in just about every way otherwise. Dead King Freddy isn't doing this because he's forced to in any capacity, it's his decision that he's forcing on other people. Of course the kids he killed want to keep living, the missing kids don't really want to hurt you either. But to transition into the next portion of the video, I want to go over a potential flaw in my reasoning some of you may be seeing. While it's not as common in FNaFs 1, 2, and 3 as it is in later games, Purple Guy, as a character, is typically associated with rabbits. This is because he winds up becoming Springtrap, and because he used the Spring Bonnie costume to kill the kids. It'd be weird for him to be represented by a bear because of that, right? Especially when I'm insinuating that Dead King Freddy is specifically an analog for Springtrap. This is a fair point to make, but it does have a few holes. This is because there are also reasons to associate Purple Guy with Freddy. In FNaF 3, Shadow Freddy can be argued to be something of a malicious figure. He leads the animatronics to the safe room, somewhere it's said will make their programming freak out. They go there because of him, and it ends up readying Purple Guy to attack them. It's not unreasonable to interpret this as Purple Guy luring them into the room somehow. Shadow Freddy has also routinely been portrayed as having a purple color, so because of this, many people already associate Shadow Freddy with Purple Guy in some capacity. PopGoes is one example of a fan project that did this. In the old continuity, they had Shadow Freddy be a manifestation of the rumors surrounding Purple Guy. That means there's precedent for Purple Guy getting compared with a bear character instead of a rabbit, especially when we're talking about PopGoes. Something I should also mention as a brief aside. There's a gambling minigame in King Freddy's Fight, which has a potential reference to Shadow Freddy. The death lasers next to him flash from time to time, and can either turn gold or purple. If they turn gold at the same time you hit him, you get a critical hit on him, and you do a lot more damage. If If they turn purple, though, he reflects your attack, which ends up killing you more often than not. Given how he turns purple when this happens, you can interpret it as being a reference to the character, in the same way you can interpret him turning yellow as a reference to Golden Freddy in some form. And that's all the evidence I have for my conclusion. That is, within PopGoes the Dead Forest. What we're going to talk about next regards a secret hidden within the expansion to PopGoes Arcade that I mentioned earlier, PopGoes and the Machinist. See, after you beat all the main bosses in that part of the game, something ends up happening in one of the forests. In the South Forest, if you stay in it for too long, the ground starts shaking. Deep below, where you once fought Robot Foxy, he is still here. A mind drifting around, now given a host once again. This is PopGoes Arcade's secret boss, the Mangle. Dead King Freddy still lives on in the form of this thing. Scraps of parts, alive again, and one of the hardest challenges you've faced thus far. Considering all we've talked about, you're probably just itching for me to tell you what I think this guy is. Well, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but it's still a form of Simon. Yeah, a form of him. Specifically, it's Simon as we see him in PopGoes Evergreen. What I'm suggesting now is that if PopGoes the Dead Forest is meant to be compared with the first 3 FNaF games, PopGoes and the Machinist is meant to be compared with PopGoes Evergreen itself. We don't know much about what Simon will be like for Evergreen, but we do know what he was like in the original PopGoes. See, without going too deep into why he becomes this way just yet, the original PopGoes plot also had a new version of Simon after Springtrap. This is what he looked like in that game. Simon is expected to be relevant to PopGoes Evergreen again, though in an entirely different way, and, well, we may very well have a hint as to what he looks like already. Nothing so public as to be known about by most of you. No, this is the point in the video where I'm finally going to have to talk about a newer PopGoes release that isn't PopGoes Arcade. If you aren't already aware, some time ago there was this thing that got released called Long POPGOES. It's a pack of emojis for use in Discord servers, and it has all sorts of variations and fun things you can do to play around with. And that's all fine and good, but there's something hidden in it that's actually relevant for me to bring up. Long POPGOES got 2 updates. The first one adds Sarah and Saffron, along with Candy and Cindy, from Five Nights at Candy's. The second one, however, is why I'm talking about it at all. You didn't get to see what it added from previews or anything. You had to look for it yourself. It's a secret, put in the recycle bin, a contained anomaly. And there's a note, a log entry, your only clue on what this thing is and why exactly it's here. The lab has finally taken a closer look at those recovered fragments of the mutilated Long POPGOES pieces. Though Long POPGOES' mysterious and sometimes disturbing nature is not entirely explainable, it has become obvious that the visibly mangled extensions of his body was not one of its intentional features. Their running theory is that a single creature, independent from Long POPGOES, is responsible for those injuries. Aside from the creature's obsession with ventilation systems, very little data was collected on it. I say was because before we could run any proper tests on the anomaly, it was already contained and deleted by the higher-ups. They seem adamant that Long POPGOES is to be left alone, and that any potential threats to it be wiped out ASAP. Fair enough. I'll file this under the nickname that the guys in the office have seemingly stuck with. Ventman. Ventman. A striking name. This character has not been referred to once or referenced since, after being introduced in Long POPGOES. It might be easy to write off this character as just a for-fun gore expansion, but I don't feel the same way. Out of all the places to first hint at Simon's place in Evergreen, I think it was in Long POPGOES. I find the idea so crazy, it just might be true. I mean, look at this one big picture we get of him. It's a face, the only picture of it we get, and I urge you to take a good long look. Remind you of anything? No? Let me just... Now, we talked a little bit about her earlier, but isn't there another important character we've met so far who's also represented in this way? Vaguely? A dark silhouette with glowing eyes and teeth? Yes. What I'm insisting upon is that, in some way, POPGOES' main antagonists are both going to be the Shadows, in some form. That, I think, is the most speculative claim of the video, but I feel like it's worth bringing up. I mean, we also have to acknowledge the snippet of lore we are given on them. It's fair to assert that Long POPGOES probably doesn't actually exist as a physical entity within the world of POPGOES Evergreen, though that doesn't mean we should fully throw out what this has to tell us. A team of guys at an office, as well as higher-ups being referred to, gives me the impression that it wants us to think about the greater world while rating it. It does say that Long POPGOES was mangled by Ventman, and that's a very specific word to use, for obvious reasons. So let's get back to that. The Mangle. Mangle says that this form is their second chance. It's an interesting way to put it, especially when you factor in that this is their third attempt at living. No, they don't consider their first chance at life as a chance at all. What they're referring to is their plan, to something greater they were working towards, the pursuit of immortality. This is discussed further in the ending monologue they give at the end of their fight. Have you finally released me, little warrior? Flesh and fur, then bare bones. Now a cloud of thoughts, piloting a dead machine. What could be next? I'm scared. A scary note to end on. It's important to dissect the meaning of it, though. Flesh and fur, then bare bones. Now a cloud of thoughts piloting a dead machine. What this is doing for us is laying out a timeline of events for the character. Not just for King Freddy, though. It's also plotting out what exactly happened to Simon. First he's flesh and fur, a normal human. Then he's bare bones, inside of Springtrap. Finally, at the end of it all, we get this new version of him. A cloud of thoughts, piloting a dead machine. There's only so many ways you can interpret it. Simon and Evergreen being comparable to Mangle in some form. Him climbing through the vents and being able to rip apart things with his bare hands so easily. It's interesting to think about. But does that make this the end of the video? Well, no, not yet. A question might have occurred to you, and it's about what I said earlier, regarding POPGOES and the Machinist storyline being meant to compare it with POPGOES Evergreens. From what we've discussed so far, you can come to the conclusion that Simon's going to be a secret in some form for POPGOES Evergreen, but I haven't really said much else about POPGOES Evergreen's plot, have I? Well, there's a reason for that. If we're led to believe that Simon is dead King Freddy, and also that he's the Mangle, then who is the Machinist, the titular main antagonist of the expansion? He also has plenty of things to talk about. Strap yourselves in, folks. We're gonna have to do a lot of story recapping for this portion of the video. So we start POPGOES and the Machinist after the events of POPGOES The Dead Forest. We open in the central hub again, with Minora being gone. Minora, if you don't know, is the girl who helps us save our game in POPGOES The Dead Forest. This is turned on its head, so now it's us that has to save her. A big hole lies where she once stood, and an eerie voice over speakers welcomes us underground once we chase after her. We can't save her just yet, so we're forced to go back through each forest. In each forest, we find robots to fight, and more holes where King Freddy's gang once stood. We find out in this first one that the person responsible for creating these robots is the same person the game is named after, the Machinist. After beating a robot version of Chica, the Machinist comes over the speakers to toss snarky comments at you, and this pattern of him telling you something once you enter the area and making fun of you once you beat each boss continues throughout the other two forests. The last forest message is intriguing though. It explains for us why the Machinist is making robotic copies of other people in the first place. Much like King Freddy, the Machinist is interested in immortality. He considers the necessary component to that being metal. He wants to replace everybody with robotic duplicates. So you beat Robot Bonnie and gain access to the Machinist's lair. You get closer and closer to meeting him, and he talks to you more, and what ends up happening is that he reveals that this scary and cocky presence he's been hitting you with has kind of been a mask the whole time. He's actually really excited to see you, and to see what your reaction will be to what he's been working on. It's at this point where we learn the identity of the Machinist. Morse the Mole. It's hard for me not to gush about his introduction. It's another one of my favorite parts of PopGoes Arcade, but I'll force myself not to for the sake of being analytical. We learn here that Morse has emotional stakes in the plot of the game. He may want to replace everybody, but this entire operation has also been a personal vendetta of his at the same time. When Morse loses, he accepts it. He expected it to happen, and is now just concerned with saying his piece. Morse wants PopGoes to be made aware of the fact that he built everything PopGoes had to face from the ground up, by himself. Everything was a result of his hard work, and nobody else's. Though, in defeat, he questions if PopGoes cares. He questions if, in another time, he could have been a part of PopGoes' gang. In the end, he really just cares about impressing you. So you free your menorah, and that's the end of the game. Except it's not, because you know the song and dance already. There's more to uncover in this game, and we've already gone over some of it with Mangle. There's another thing you need to get, though, in order to get the illustrious reward of 200%. This well in the South Forest has a developer note attached to it now, and it's your hint to get searching. Skipping ahead, because of it you can unlock the North Forest again, and you can even go back to King Freddy's throne room. In it, though, you don't find Freddy, you find a hole. And in that hole, another one. So you keep digging and digging, and the world around you becomes a glitchy mess. This then leads you into somehow accessing files that are not meant to be there. Ones that belong to someone named Fritz. It's his security cam footage. In this footage, you get a view of Blake on camera 7. As it says on the file, this was 2 days ago. The next two are both from only 1 day ago, though. The first of these two shows things scattered around, like a floorboard tile being opened with mechanisms in it exposed, and the next shows Bonnie's murder, taking place only a day before the events of PopGoes Arcade. Now, how do I know that it's Bonnie dying here? Well, here's where things start to get interesting. Stay with me. This is where we're going to have to start talking about the other new entry in PopGoes Evergreen's timeline, MyPopgoes. MyPopgoes was released in only April of this year, and adds a fair bit of insight on Bonnie's character and her place in the universe. Time for another recap. MyPopgoes opens in the month of the game's release date, April 2023. The character we're playing as is Bonnie, and we're asked by a yet unnamed person to fetch them a toolbox from a chest in the attic. So you open the chest, and in it you find a special mask. Eagle-eyed viewers have already seen it before. This body we see in the secret ending to PopGoes and the Machinist has the very same mask next to it. We know it's not just any other random toy Bonnie mask either, because when inspected in MyPopgoes, it's said to have been made with a 3D printer. You might forget, but the Freddy's location in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 was canonically only open for a few short weeks. Merch for those versions of the characters would already be hard to come by, so it's unlikely that, in the modern day, there'd be a lot of these things just lying around. It's undoubtedly the same one. In the chest, we also find MyPopgoes' namesake as well. MyPopgoes is the name of an LCD toy that Bonnie got made for her 10th birthday. This recontextualizes these events for us a bit, setting PopGoes Evergreen sometime close to modern day, and telling us that Bonnie is 25 years old around that time. But let's get back to MyPopgoes for a bit. In introducing MyPopgoes to us, Bonnie receives a letter from her father, one telling her that he's sorry for being so caught up with work. The instructions for the toy are also given to us, and are also written by Bonnie's father. There's some fun lines in here. I encourage you to read it yourself before I move on from it. So we play with the toy, and that's the gameplay of MyPopgoes. It has a cute little day-to-day system, and a catchy theme to go along with it. Once you beat every level, though, you get taken back to 2023. Then, you see this. Bonnie's body again shoved in the very same chest she got MyPopgoes from. It goes by so fast a lot of people are dumbstruck by it, but there's a definite purpose to this. We're playing as Bonnie, so she can't be looking at her body while also being inside of it. This is a flash forward, a very quick flash forward. What this is telling us is where Bonnie's body was put after she was killed. That's the only way this being shown to us is relevant in any real capacity. That means a lot of things, though. We hear the box being closed as it cuts to black. We see our limbs contorted just to fit inside the thing. You have to remember, too, that this is Bonnie's 25th birthday, what we're playing. She's up in the attic fetching someone's toolbox on her birthday. I emphasize this all just to ask this next question. How and why is she in this box in particular after being killed? It's not just any chest. She's forced inside a chest that has old family heirlooms, toys from when she was young. She's forced inside a chest that belongs to her family. How is that possible? What killed her? Who is her family? All questions to be answered in POPGOES Evergreen. And in the old version of the POPGOES canon. Here's where I throw you for a major loop. I'm going to tell you now the other major secret to POPGOES Arcade, the one that's most relevant to POPGOES Evergreen, the one that tells us a lot about how that game will be handled, and so on. It's a very similar thing to what I said before, but, well, it takes even more explaining. Hold on to your butts. Here we go. In another clean sentence. Morse the Mole is a metaphor for Fritz. Yeah, of course the camera footage guy. What are you, stupid? Let me work with you here. I'm going to tell you now what might take a while for POPGOES Evergreen to reveal to us. Fritz's last name is Glade. Yes, like Bonnie Glade, the girl we've been talking about a lot so far. He's her father. So now, I want you to reframe what we've gone over in MyPopgoes with that in mind. He's likely not only the one who asked Bonnie to fetch the toolbox, he's also the one that made MyPopgoes for her. It said in the instructions for MyPopgoes as well that Bonnie herself came up with the PopGOES characters. And considering we know that PopGOES eventually becomes a whole pizzeria, we can affirm that Fritz is the inventor of these animatronics, and partially did so for his daughter's sake. Applying this to what else we know. Him needing a toolbox at all, him making a whole LCD toy for her, and so on. It makes sense, him being an inventor type, but there's more to this. Bonnie's last name being Glade in the new continuity has more importance than you might think at first. Let's put the name Fritz and the name Glade together. Now, let's unscramble them. Fitzgerald. Now, you might have already recognized the name Fritz if you're a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's. It's the first name of one of the night guards in FNaF 2, the one you play as during the custom nights for that game. The other night guard in FNaF 2, though, is named Jeremy. Jeremy Fitzgerald. Here's where all the pieces start to come together. Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Glade are the same person. This is the main reveal of POPGOES' storyline, and I'm sorry to have spoiled it for you if you weren't already aware of it. It goes like this. Jeremy Fitzgerald is a night guard in FNaF 2, and he miraculously manages to survive each night. He's moved to the day shift, but for some reason, even during the day, the animatronics go after him. There's a special reason for this. See, the animatronics recognize Jeremy. It's something brought up in FNaF 2, how the robots are given special facial recognition software that lets them access a criminal database. This is supposed to help them detect potential threats, and unfortunately for Jeremy, he looked like one. I stress, he looked like one. Something else I haven't brought up is that Jeremy has a brother in POPGOES' storyline. Someone very important. Someone who's also his identical twin. The name of that person in question is Simon Fitzgerald. Yes, that Simon. Jeremy and Simon are brothers, identical ones. But the thing is, Simon wasn't around during that time. He went missing after the events of the missing children's incident. He was busy with his research, and it cost Jeremy his life. That was at least how it appeared. What happened to Jeremy was the bite of 87. The animatronic that went after him was Toy Bonnie. This is where the importance of Toy Bonnie as a character all stems from. So he is on death's door, and it seems like nothing will save him. That's when Simon secretly steps in and saves Jeremy with an experimental procedure using what he's been researching. Jeremy miraculously survives, but not without a hitch. He ends up getting partial amnesia, and a huge amount of press coverage for having survived. To avert this, he and the rest of his family that's still around move to England, and they stay there, now going under new names. the Glades. Jeremy changes his name to Fritz. This explanation might confuse you, given how it doesn't really explain why Fritz Smith is a character in FNaF 2. This is because PopGoes' timeline makes it so Fritz Smith wasn't ever a real person. He was just an elaborate setup for this happening. The same goes for Black Rabbit, her appearing in FNaF 2 as well. The idea is that they're not physically there, they're just false echoes of the future haunting the past. Fritz then lives his life for a while, has his daughter Bonnie, and watches her grow up. That is, until the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 takes place. When the building goes up in flames, you may remember that it says there'll be an auction for the remaining items salvaged from the rubble. Fritz winds up going to this auction, and finds the remaining pieces of Springtrap through this. He acquires them, and Freddy Fazbear's hat, which he repurposes by having the new character, PopGoes the Weasel, wear it. And so we finally reach modern day, in some sense. Bonnie, now fully grown, has her own agenda, and is also researching life after death, similar to how Simon does. As we see in PopGoes and the Machinist's secret ending, something ends up getting tampered with in this room. Seemingly what happens next is, thinking that she's an intruder, and potentially in response to Fritz being faced with the mask of his trauma, Fritz winds up killing Bonnie, in the building that he made for her. That's everything, up to what happens in PopGoes Arcade. However, there is more to go over, and some disclaimers I'll make before I go over anything else. Everything I just recounted for you is me taking pieces of the old and new continuities and mashing them together. Most of what I just said is from the original timeline. To again emphasize, a lot of things might be different for the new PopGoes Evergreen continuity, but I tried to keep the broad strokes vague enough that you can come to your own conclusions about what is most essential to the plot, and what is more likely to return than other things. As an example, because Bonnie's last name in the reboot is still Glade, it's a safe assumption that Fritz is still her father, because of his name being a word scramble for Fitzgerald. Now, moving on, we get to the main events of PopGoes and PopGoes Evergreen. We don't know too much about new Fritz just yet, but there's still a lot to pull from regarding old Fritz's character. Something kind of funny about the original PopGoes game is how Fritz is actually always only a couple rooms away from you, in his office. He stays there every night of the main game, and is portrayed as kind of a self-conscious recluse in most PopGoes media. For the original PopGoes game, he was your phone guy. He talked on and on about his robots, how efficient the building was, and how it essentially runs itself. There's a whole plot that unfolds as he talks and the nights go on, some of the stuff that we've already talked about, but there's another thing going on behind the curtain that's also relevant. You see, in the original timeline, Simon at this point in the continuity was well and truly dead. He died as Springtrap, and even though Fritz had his remains, he had no intention of using them for anything. He did end up caring about his brother enough to do something else, however. I showed you this guy momentarily earlier, saying that it's PopGoes' old version of Simon after Springtrap. Technically this is correct, but only technically. See, it's not possessed by Simon or anything, it's a robot meant to be like him. He's an artificial intelligence, made by Fritz for the sake of being like his brother. This ends up not working out too well for him, you might guess. And the same winds up happening to Morse. Yeah, this video is about PopGoes Arcade, I know. Morse's plan, as we discussed, is about making robotic replicas of people, and replacing them. This by itself is easy enough to connect with what Fritz does in the original PopGoes timeline, him wanting to make a replica of his brother in some fashion. But it doesn't end there. Morse is also a really cocky character. That's one of the reasons people love him, because of just how intoxicating his presence is as an antagonist, making sly jabs at you every turn. Now, read again the instructions in MyPopgoes for a second, if you don't mind. You might find this to be a very shaky point, but I want to make a note out of how self-aware Bonnie's father, Fritz, is here, in his notes to his daughter. He's caught up with work, makes cute little remarks at Bonnie's expense, saying, or maybe he dies, up to you, and saying that PopGoes being thirsty, hungry, and bored sounds like you. It's a very cute relationship for them to have, and I feel like one you can draw conclusions from. Something also worth noting in this discussion is how, in the original game, Fritz was far more jittery in his phone calls, like how a lot of phone guys usually are. Here, though, he's well-spoken, and that's a big change to what he was known for being like already. Moving on, the big piece of evidence I have for Morse being a stand-in for Fritz is, I think, the narrative framework of the two being so similar, because both their true identities are a mystery. I went over all of it for you, but as I said earlier, finding out that Fritz Glade is Jeremy Fitzgerald is a big reveal. It's the big reveal the original POPGOES had in store for you. So much of the game is about who he is, why there's conflict surrounding him, and so on. The same can be said about Morse, too, how big a mystery the identity of the Machinist is. Take for instance this teaser for the game, presenting you with multiple options for who it could be. It actually lists Morse as a potential candidate, as well as Fritz. There's also this guy, Wimps the Weeper, who you never even have to encounter to get 200%, whose sole purpose being in the game is to make silly guesses about who the Machinist is. Ever since the reveal teaser to POPGOES and the Machinist, this question was being asked. But why should we care? It keeps insisting that Morse is important, that he's this guy we might be familiar with, and that it'd be satisfying for us to learn his identity. But why is it satisfying? Well, this is kind of a complicated situation. See, if you're unaware, Morse is a character who was cut from the original POPGOES. He was cut so early in production that he was replaced by both Blake and Stone. The reason why people care about Morse so much, though, is because he became a meme among the POPGOES community after the fact. He was seen as a bit of a joke character. These renders of him sporting wings and laser arms are commonly spread around. That's why for a lot of people, seeing him in an official capacity is really satisfying. It also explains a bit why he has a backstory about potentially being a part of POPGOES' gang. That said, this meta backstory for Morse is also a point in favor of him being a counterpart to Fritz in some ways. Think about it. You present your audience with a mystery character, insist on the identity of this character being important, urging people to be aware of it and think about it, and the big reveal winds up with this character being someone we're already familiar with. We're told to care about the Machinist's identity, and he winds up being Morse, someone the community is well aware of. We're told to care about Fritz's identity, and he winds up being Jeremy, someone the community is well aware of. Considering there's no other characters in the POPGOES continuity that are inventor types, it's also safe to compare them just on a surface level. Morse makes robots of POPGOES in the gang, Fritz makes robots of POPGOES in the gang. This is also like the most inconsequential point, but I find it funny that throughout most of the game, Morse is watching you on the cameras the entire time, and like a minute's jog away from his lair, you encounter this whole dark secret, which also just has to do with camera footage. He's watching you then, he's watching you now. I think I've said all I need to at this point, but I'll close out the video with one more thing. There's a lot to read into with just these three character designs. You might not have noticed, but Dead King Freddy is meant to look like the Grim Reaper. Simon, like the Grim Reaper, is also uncaring in the act of leading people to the afterlife. The Mangle is also very fun to look at as well. Unlike their FNaF 2 incarnation, Mangle here has so much more to them. They're huge, but also only stay on the ceiling. If it's true that Ventman is Simon, I can't wait to see how big he is too. And so lastly, we get to Morse, the sole inventor of everything we see before us. Holed up in his room, is insecure at his core. He talks a big game, but he really just longs for validation, which causes him to get tunnel vision on what really matters. That's why he is the final boss of POPGOES Arcade, and one of the main characters of POPGOES Evergreen. The name Glade is also a word, if you didn't know. It's a word for an open space in a forest. Thanks for watching. I'd like to give a big thanks here to my friend Bane for getting the ball rolling with this theory. She was the one who noticed Mangle's death speech was similar to Simon's backstory, and from there we got talking about it. I'm a big fan of POPGOES, and this video wouldn't exist without that love I have for the series. Have a good rest of your day. If you're curious about what my next project will be, I'll say it's going to be the start of a new series for the channel. I hope you enjoy it when it comes out. Goodbye.
But my eyes stay open wide. I can never dream, I can never get to where I feel